Every Boy I Ever Kissed. Written and narrated by Nellwyn Lampert. To the Boys. Author note. This is a true story. The events in this book are all told as they are remembered by the author, without invention or embellishment. In some cases, names, personal details, and slight chronological elements have been altered to protect the privacy of those concerned. A note on virginity. Growing up as a heterosexual woman, I felt that virginity loss, for me, would mean having penetrative intercourse. This understanding might not feel right or inclusive to everyone. I encourage you to define virginity however it feels best to you, or to reject the concept altogether. Introduction. I could already see the morning headlines. 20-year-old virgin found dead in mysterious field 5 minutes from home. It was dark, but not particularly late, on a spring evening as I followed my roommate Jess away from campus and toward unexplored avenues of urban development. If I'd been back in my hometown, this would have felt completely benign. But this was the big city, and our neighborhood had a very bad reputation. "Just trust me," Jess said as we walked deeper into an unlit field. "What's in the bag?" I asked but got no reply. At the time, the chance of us being murdered that night seemed about as likely as the chance that I would wind up an 80-year-old virgin cat lady. Which is to say, very likely. I followed Jess to where the field ended along the edge of a construction site. We stopped on a precipice and looked out over a deep cavernous gorge where backhoes and dump trucks slumbered. My friend reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of white dinner plates. "I think you need this," she said, handing me an orange Sharpie. "You're going to write everything that's bothering you on these plates, and then we're going to smash them." I almost cried. I took the Sharpie and cramped my handwriting in tiny letters across the porcelain plates, worried I would run out of room. I wrote about every boy I'd ever kissed, and every ridiculous, unexpected, and shocking moment that had brought me to the edge of that cliff. Ethan lies crying in the gutter at 3 a.m, the back of his coat wet with rainwater that hasn't yet made its way to the sewer. His phone keeps ringing in my purse, but I know what his brother's voice would say on the other end. "It's okay," I keep saying. "Just get up and we'll go home. We'll break up and you'll meet a nice guy. You just have to get out of the street first." I want to scream. I want to cry. I want to drag him up by his collar and force his feet to walk. But I can't. I must be patient, and more patient. Something isn't right. Something always goes wrong. It's too dark to see, but I can feel the space between our naked bodies getting wider and wider until Ben is beside me instead of above. I hear his voice rise up out of the darkness, and I know, both instinctively and from experience, that it will shake with the timbre of an identity crisis. I think I have a pornography addiction. In the moonlight from the window, I can see Dave's face above mine as I lie back in my bed and take off my clothes. His strong jaw, his masculine nose, his eyes full of tears. I'm not surprised this time. I know what comes next. The whispered confession of a brand new secret. The warm, sinking feeling of taking a young man's body deep into my arms. The gentle stroking of his hair and the assurance that, as always, it's okay. It will be okay. I am the girl who will take your secrets deep inside her vodka-soaked heart at 2 or 3 a.m, and in the bright light of the next day, I know I will never see you again. I will turn on the water in the shower so hot that my skin flushes red all over, and I will cry where I can't be heard. I will get back into bed and roll the blankets and pillows up against my back so it feels almost as if there is someone lying there beside me, holding me in his arms. I can almost feel his slow, quiet breath against my neck, even though I can only imagine the feeling. I wonder how it's possible to miss something I've never had. Standing on the edge of that construction site, I smash every single plate, one by one. It would be a cop-out to say that I spent the first quarter of my life desperately chasing love because my parents divorced when I was little. And it makes me cringe to write that, for years, I wanted a boyfriend more than anything else. But to be honest, aren't we all looking for love? Let's face it, as early as I can remember, I wanted to be done with dating. Done with boys and bars and checking my messages every 3 minutes to see if he'd texted. At 5 years old, I put on my mother's white silk slip, long enough to touch my ankles, and hung a piece of white tulle off my short curly hair. Then I grew up and realized I'm a feminist, a girl power enthusiast lucky enough to have been born in 1990. I'm not sure I would have known enough to use a word like feminism at a young age, but nothing helps you understand female empowerment quite like growing up with a single mother. By my teen years, it no longer seemed appropriate to admit, even to myself, that being someone's girlfriend was one of my most cherished goals. Luckily for me, it was a goal that appeared easy enough to accomplish naturally, in time, without requiring too much effort on my part. Growing up, I took it for granted that I would get good grades, go to university, and probably break a few hearts. Those were inevitable truths because they came from the lips of adults, and because history dictated I should follow in my mother's footsteps. My mother is beautiful, right down to her core. She appears to leap out of photographs, tall and slim, with miles of raven black hair and piercing blue eyes. In one family photo from the 1970s, my young mother sits with one leg draped casually over the other. With an unnatural confidence for a teenager, she looks like she belongs in the pages of Vogue Paris, not in the rec room of a suburban Toronto home. I didn't look anything like my mother growing up, but I listened to her stories about learning to drive with her high school boyfriend and singing backup for her first husband back when all he played were small nightclubs in Europe. And I believed something similar would one day happen for me. All I had to do was figure out how to be beautiful, inside and out. For the first 21 years of my life, I pursued love and beauty as aggressively as I pursued academic excellence and some kind of undefined creative career. Like many young women, I had somehow gotten the message that intelligence, independence, creativity, physical attractiveness, and a willingness to run with the boys would inevitably lead to the fun privileges of sex and, eventually, to the ultimate goal, love. Finding a boyfriend, having sex, falling in love, it was all supposed to be simple. Until that evening, looking out over the construction site with a stack of plates in my hand, when I realized I'd been lied to. Every adult woman I knew, every magazine I'd read, even feminism itself had told me, in one way or another, that having sex was easy, even too easy. Everywhere I turn, I run into a baby boomer parent wringing her hands in shock and fear over hookup culture and phone apps that let you order a date like you order takeout. I remember all too well the shame of being a 21-year-old virgin in a world that seems to value sexual savvy above all else. Years later, I realized I wasn't alone. Millennials, the alleged trailblazers of the hookup generation, are actually having way less sex than most people think. In fact, as a group, we boast over 50% more virgins in the 20 to 24 age bracket than our hand-wringing boomer parents did when they were that age. So what gives? As I watched those plates shatter on the concrete below me, I tried to figure out where exactly I'd gone wrong. I thought I had followed the social script perfectly. The trouble was that I had been prepared for a world that didn't exist. everything I had been taught about sex and dating was a myth. And, as a bonus, I discovered I was woefully unprepared for reality. As I fought my way ever more aggressively toward love and sex, I slowly discovered all the little lies our generation has been told. The good news is, when you uncover a lie, you also uncover the truth. Chapter 1. I am 18 years old, and I have never been kissed. It's my biggest and most shameful secret. But that's not why I'm crying right now. I'm wiping tears off my cheeks and trying not to think about my mother's big green minivan speeding down the highway, away from my dorm room and back toward my little hometown. I unzip the first of my many suitcases and begin to unpack my fall sweaters, my low-rise jeans, and my overpriced eyeshadows. Reaching my hand down in between the soft layers of folded fabric, I feel something unexpectedly hard and square. Pushing my clothes away, I see an all-too-familiar hot pink cardboard box. "Oh, Jesus, Mom," I say out loud as if she were still sitting in the room next to mine. "Seriously?" I sit down on my unmade bed and stare at the bright little box with the words, "Her Pleasure Ultra Ribbed," emblazoned on the front in bold gold letters. Of course, Mom would buy me the most feminist condoms she could get her hands on. I stare at the box and feel like it's judging me. I've never been a fan of pink. I root around through my piles of luggage until I find the welcome pack from my college. It's a big laundry bag filled with dental dams and granola bars, so I throw the box of condoms in there where it seems to belong. The good news is that I'm no longer crying. Instead, I'm remembering a walk my mom and I took along the beach just 2 weeks before. In an uncharacteristic splurge, my mother had flown my younger brother and me out to the Atlantic coast for one last holiday before I went away to university. We spent the days swimming in the ocean and driving the winding Nova Scotia highways, singing Daydream Believer as loud as we could. At night, we went out for lobster and curled up in shared rooms like we'd done years ago. One night, as my brother lay reading comic books by the lamplight in his bed, and my mother and I were tucked up in our own across the room, I asked her to tell me a bedtime story. I was struck by the sudden realization that these were my last moments of childhood, and I wanted to do something to capture them, to feel that feeling of being safe and cared for before going out into the world on my own. My mother told me the life story of Virginia Woolf, a biography filled with loss, death, mental illness, and suicide. Her subconscious message seemed clear. It was time to grow up. The next day, we went to the beach. While my brother busied himself with sticks and tidal pools, my mom and I took a walk along the water, holding our sandals in our hands and letting the cool, salty ocean brush up against our toes as the waves breathed in between them. "I've been wanting to talk to you," my mother said, "before you go away to school." I said, already dreading what she would say with the instinctual teenage knowledge that a parent is about to do or say something embarrassing. "You're going off to university, and there are going to be lots of guys there. Guys who are older and more experienced than you are." "Mom," I said, trying to cut her off. I didn't need to hear the speech again. Don't be pressured into anything. Don't drink anything you didn't see the bartender make herself. Keep $20 in your wallet in case you need to call a cab. "And I just want you to relax and have fun," she finished. I blinked and stared out at the ocean, trying to think of what to say. Part of me was pleased that she thought I was responsible and mature enough not to need to hear the speech again. The other part of me was shaken to realize that even my mother thought I was a repressed prude. I think you're the only mother in the world to give that as her parting wisdom before sending her 18-year-old daughter off to college in the big city. My mom shrugged with a twinkle in her eye reserved for things she found particularly exciting. Sex, small amounts of responsibly sourced marijuana, the combination of brandy, salted peanuts, and potato chips. And I'll buy you some condoms, she added. Then I finally did roll my eyes. Mom, I'm perfectly capable of taking care of that myself, I said. Even back then, my opinion was that if you were too embarrassed to buy your own condoms at the drugstore, you were probably too immature to be having sex. My mom always had a good sense of when to drop a subject, so she didn't say anything else for the rest of the trip. It wasn't until I was back home a week later and packing my things that I spotted the box of condoms inside one of the suitcases she'd gotten out of storage for me. Mom, I said, marching into her studio, I was serious. I can buy my own condoms. I placed them firmly down on her desk and went back to my packing. It wasn't until I was already on campus that I realized she must have somehow slipped the box in again at the last possible moment, hiding it under my sweaters. Back in my dorm room, I wandered over to the window and looked out at the swarms of students playing getting-to-know-you games in the courtyard while I unpacked and organized. Maybe my mother was right. Maybe my romantic failures were tied to my overall inability to simply relax and have fun. Relax and have fun. It's harder than it sounds, particularly for those of us who are coming of age in the 21st century. They call us millennials and digital babies. Repeated over and over again, it starts to sound like nothing more than boomer code for maladjusted. But while it's easy to repeat the age-old lament that our parents just don't get us, the truth is that so many of us don't have that blessed hippie ability to relax and have fun. More than ever before, we are crippled with anxiety, depression, and existential angst that lasts long beyond the mopey, misunderstood teen years. When it comes to sex and romance, the surge in anxiety disorders among young people is often cited as a main explanation for why millennials are the first generation to have fewer sexual partners and lose their virginity later in life than their parents. It's a strange reversal in the tide of sexual liberation that prompts me to ask, what are we really afraid of? It's not merely the usual risks of disease and parenthood that have paralyzed us. The real problem is much more insidious, much more complicated, and a whole lot harder to work around. Chapter. The turn of the millennium brought us a new wave of feminism and a new form of sexual liberation. Being empowered, in control of your body, and sexually free from the constraints of the patriarchy often manifests itself in unexpected ways. Miley Cyrus blurs lines nearly naked at the VMAs. Amy Schumer calls herself a cum dumpster, and millions of young women fall victim to the patriarchy's sleight of hand as these modern-day feminist icons reinforce hypersexualized representations of femininity under the guise of quote-unquote empowerment. My friends and I are the daughters of women who remember feminist separatist movements and bra burnings. My mother warned me over and over about the health risks of wearing bras with underwire and the moral duplicitousness of push-up padding. Anything other than a single sweep of mascara and a coat of lipstick meant you were hiding your natural beauty from the world. In my mother's era, feminist debates went even further to question what was empowering and what was objectifying. The impact of sex work, BDSM, pornography, and even having sex with men at all was up for debate. Did choosing to be a stripper mean you were inherently a victim of patriarchal objectification of the female body? Or could it mean you were empowered and sexually liberated? While my mother remembers second-wave feminism from personal experience, by the time I was coming of age at the turn of the millennium, the debate was over. The feminists of the world, whoever they are, had decided that sexually explicit imagery wasn't inherently objectifying, given the right circumstances. They even took it a step further and decided that overt female sexuality can be a source of personal power. This is why you're more likely than ever to find a gender studies major dancing naked at a high-class club to help her pay for graduate school. But even though the debate has allegedly been settled, it is still far from simple. When I was in my undergrad, I visited my most ardently feminist friend after she'd transferred to a new university a few hours away. A gender studies major, Stephanie was well on her way to becoming a self-described professional feminist and was considering a part-time job as an exotic dancer. We decided to visit her college town's only strip club on a Friday night so she could get a feel for her potential future profession. Never having been to a strip club before, I wouldn't have known that this was a less than ideal place for our initial introduction. There was no burlesque glamour, no cut-glass chandeliers or red velvet curtains. It felt more like a dirty sports bar than anything else. The place was surprisingly empty for a weekend night. Only 2 or 3 middle-aged men sat by themselves close to the stage. There were no bachelor parties or rowdy undergrads. Just 3 men, a stripper, a waitress, and 2 junior feminists. Stephanie and I chose a table at the back of the bar where we could observe from a distance and use words like patriarchy and intersectionality without drawing attention to ourselves. We ordered a couple of domestic beers, ignoring a neon sign written in Sharpie advertising cheap shots with names we didn't recognize. Steph and I talked about how good it must feel to own your body and be that comfortable in your skin. We talked about how liberating it seemed to really be in charge of your sexuality and not have to apologize for having breasts and full hips. But secretly, I thought being a stripper sounded horrible. I couldn't get my head around the way the women on stage let the men reach up from their seats at her feet and run their hands across her naked body. Touching seemed to break a rule I'd understood about strip club etiquette, and that shattered any illusion I'd had that the woman on stage was in control of the situation. Perhaps she felt she was, and more power to her, but I could only imagine rough hands damp with beer snaking over my thighs, and I had to look away. If it had been me on that stage, I'm not sure I could have refrained from kicking anyone who tried to touch me square in the face. Stephanie called me a few weeks later and told me she'd decided to take a summer job as a camp counselor instead. I asked her what had changed her mind. It didn't really feel safe, she confessed. I told my friend Kyle about the idea, and he was supportive, but he said if I took the job, he was going to come and walk me to and from work every day. He didn't want me leaving there alone late at night. I realized he was probably right, and there's no way I would ask him to do that for me all the time. I wondered what was liberating and empowering about not being able to walk home from work without a male escort. I've never really related to the idea that exotic dancing or posing nude for your boyfriend is a feminist act, but I can understand why other people do, and to each her own. The power we feel we get from harnessing a sexual identity is about more than just having a satisfying sex life and making a feminist statement. It translates into all areas of our lives, becoming inherently linked to how we perceive ourselves. Overt displays of sexual liberation don't only signify empowerment, they also tell the world, and ourselves, that we are confident, self-actualized, desirable, beautiful, independent, and above all else, lovable. I finally understand why I had been so desperate, ever since Andre put sex on my radar in grade 6, to cultivate the perfect image of desirability. Even though, at 11, that meant nothing more than being old enough to carry a purse from time to time. So what does this image of idealized sexuality really look like? In my teens, it meant having a boyfriend with whom you had respectful, monogamous sex after you'd been dating at least 6 months. You were expected to be on the pill, and he was expected to wear a condom. It got more complicated in my early 20s. The girls I knew all operated under the same unspoken rules. Have sex with more than 1 or 2 people, but not more than 15 or so. Watch porn, read Dan Savage, and be sexually adventurous, but don't go too far down the road into kink culture. Have sex with multiple partners regardless of gender or sexual orientation, but once you commit to a relationship, be monogamous. Sleep with whomever you want because you're a liberated feminist. But don't sleep with anyone on this arbitrary list of guys your roommate pinned up on the fridge. This is the backdrop of millennial sexuality. We got so many of our ideas at such a young age from a vast variety of conflicting sources. At first, it was all whispers about the future and hoping a guy like Andre would simply be brave enough to hold my hand. Then, as the years went on, I accumulated more and more ideas about what I wanted my sexual expression to look like. I had impossibly strong convictions before I had any experience to back them up. I was a sponge, absorbing the examples set by my more experienced friends and the lessons I picked up from Cosmopolitan, Savage Love, and my sex-positive mother. The problem was that I didn't really know what any of it would mean when it came down to that critical moment. Would I be able to live up to my own image of the liberated, empowered woman I wanted to be? I recently read a Netflix synopsis for an episode of the quirky ABC sitcom Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23. Chloe encourages June to be sexually empowered and to dabble in some casual encounters. I want to highlight the link here in nothing more than a simple TV synopsis between sexual empowerment and casual encounters. Empowerment is so closely linked to being not just sexually active, but sexually blasé, that it's become difficult to separate the two ideas. This connection between sex and empowerment is one of the ideas that perpetuates the image of hypersexualized millennials. In university, I was surrounded by women who were having empowering, intellectually fulfilling feminist hookups regularly. It's that image which makes those of us who aren't having sex, those of us who feel nauseous when looking at a heart-shaped pendant, feel like we're defective in some way. It doesn't matter if you actually have feelings for the person you're sleeping with, or if you're 11, the person you're dating, so long as you're sleeping with, or even flirting with, somebody. The fear is that if you aren't, you're not really empowered. You're constrained by a patriarchy that fears female sexuality. You're repressed. You're a bad feminist. But here's the rub. So much of that liberated, empowered sexual expression is still targeted at men. The naked pictures my friends took of themselves with their camera phones weren't like Polaroids kept privately in the back of their underwear drawers to look at years later with sweet remembrance. They were taken to be sent to men. 9 times out of 10, exotic dancers don't get naked for a room full of gender studies majors. They do it for men. While there are brilliant communities creating inclusive and empowering erotica that has nothing to do with fulfilling male fantasies, so much of the mainstream model of the eroticized female body is about the male gaze. And sadly for many young women like me, that mainstream model is all we see. There it is, the uncomfortable truth. So much of our empowerment and liberation is still centered on men. We try to have sex like a man instead of like a woman, idealizing and aspiring to the male model instead of creating our own. And what we often mistake for empowerment is, for many of us, drawn from the validation we get from acquiescing to the male gaze. We all find our strength in different ways, and there are no hard and fast rules about what is empowering behavior and what isn't. Every woman will decide for herself. But overall, as a culture, we need to rethink how we've centralized men in the liberation of women. At 11, being someone's girlfriend was scary and overwhelming. I wanted all the benefits. I wanted to be considered beautiful, popular, successful, empowered, and desirable, but I was scared of what it might cost me. What would I have to do? What would people say about me? No one else had a boyfriend yet. I was beginning the same struggle every woman faces throughout our lives as love interests. What does my sexuality say about who I am? I was safe behind my mother's computer. I could craft every sentence as carefully as I crafted my screen name. But this wasn't enough for Andre. He wanted us to spend more time together. I knew he did. He said so in his Christmas note. Andre spent a good portion of our MSN conversations over the school holidays convincing me to go with him to a dance at the local YMCA in January. It would be our first real date together and the first date of my lifetime. The idea of being stuck in a public gym for hours, surrounded by strangers, was nauseating. But boyfriends expect you to spend time with them, and I quickly learned that they don't like it when their seemingly romantic proposals are met with hesitation. My mother called his mother and established that there would be chaperones and other kids from our school. My best friend Justine was going, and her older brother would be there to look out for us, so it was all settled. I wore an ankle-length jean skirt and a sparkly blue turtleneck. I thought I looked great. In reality, I probably looked like a shiny novitiate. The nuns who taught choir at our Catholic school wore ankle-length jean skirts and turtlenecks, but I didn't make the connection back then. I didn't understand sexy. I repeat, I was 11. My mother drove me into the city, dropped me off at the doors to the YMCA, and promised to be back in a couple hours. The gym was dark, so Justine and I hovered in a patch of light by the door. Music videos projected on the far wall shone over us, demanding exaltation. Little beads of sweat started to form on the edge of my turtleneck as I watched the older kids dance and waited for my so-called boyfriend. That dance was a preview of all the parties I would ever attend. In some ways, they're all the same. The darkness, the music, that suffocating feeling. I learned quickly it's best to wear as little clothing as possible. Even if you're not looking to attract a dance partner, the key is really to avoid the heat rising from all those bodies so close together. How can a room so dark be so hot? The ceiling disappeared into the darkness, making me feel like I was at the bottom of a well. Low-rise jeans had just come in. The butt of the early 2000s was a round, apple-bottom butt. The teenage boys at the YMCA seemed to like it. Not one girl was dancing without a guy's hands roaming over her jeans. Chaperones not much older than the dancers circled the floor. They grabbed the boys by the wrists and moved their hands up 6 inches to the girls' waists. At some point, they brought out stacks of pizza boxes and served up slices on brown paper towels for $1. I loved the smell of pizza so hot and so fresh that the cheese slides off, leaving a trail of tomato sauce and melted mozzarella in the box. Justine asked if I was hungry, but I didn't want to eat. I thought Andre might want to kiss me. First kisses shouldn't taste like pepperoni. I kept checking the clock on the wall. I may have been among the last generation of women to stand around waiting for a guy without sending an angry text message. We didn't have cell phones yet. I'm not sure how long I waited, but it felt like hours before I saw Luke come in the front door with Andre lingering behind him. I smiled, but they couldn't see me standing in the dark crowd. I watched Luke make his way toward the gym, while Andre hovered in the foyer between the 2 sets of doors. He walked in circles around the little entryway. He didn't come in. I hung back inside the gym and waited. It wasn't long before Luke found me. He was alone. I guessed Andre was still pacing around the foyer, refusing to pay the entrance fee to come inside. Luke had treated his hair to an extra coat of gel that evening so it stood straight up out of his head. I remember him wearing a green sports jersey, but I don't know if that's true. It's the type of thing a guy like him would have worn to a dance at the YMCA. "Hi," I said. "Hey, I have to talk to you." "Okay." There was a knot in my throat. I was glad I hadn't eaten any pizza. "Andre wanted me to tell you." Luke's eyes darted briefly sideways before snapping back quickly. "He's not coming." "Okay." It came out sounding so upbeat and chipper. Luke obviously hadn't caught me spying on them. He didn't know I'd seen Andre. Were they hoping I would leave so Andre could come into the party without having to face me? Do you know what I mean? Luke looked a little surprised, as if I wasn't quite as smart as I pretended to be. Yep, I know exactly what you mean. I'm okay. I'm fine. I don't care. I blinked back tears he couldn't see in the dark. It was that simple. I peeked back outside the gym into the foyer, but Andre had disappeared. I didn't know whether he'd gone home or was hiding somewhere inside the crowded gym, waiting to reunite with Luke. I wondered why he'd bothered to come at all. I spent the rest of the evening crying in the corner, waiting for my mom to pick me up at the scheduled time. It wasn't love. It wasn't lust. It was sheer shame and humiliation. Suddenly, I missed the relationship I had never really had and hadn't truly wanted. The rest of elementary school passed uneventfully in terms of romantic liaisons. There was a brief drama when, the next year, Andre picked a rose out of some suburban garden and gave it to Justine right in front of me. We were all out trick-or-treating in a big group, and he must have decided a rose was a more romantic gesture than a note stuffed inside a tennis ball. It was the first time I had ever felt second-rate, but it certainly wouldn't be the last. I didn't love him. I didn't even have a real true crush. But I had gotten a taste of what it felt like to be wanted, to be desired, to be validated by a man, and I wanted more. I was ruined. I could no longer feel as good about myself as he had made me feel. I had lost the beautiful confidence of childhood. It would be many, many years before I would be able to walk past a mirror without looking at my reflection. The belief that I wasn't beautiful sunk into my body like a ball of lead in my stomach. I spent the next 2 years before high school trying unsuccessfully to wrestle my appearance into something I found more satisfying. In the middle of all this, I was gifted glasses and braces, and most of the boys in my grade, including Andre, transferred to a bigger school. With only 3 guys left in our class, and none of them particularly interesting, my friends and I were given 2 years to live in a precious, rare cocoon where dating was relegated to the future. We experimented with bangs and makeup to prepare ourselves for when we would leave our sheltered French Catholic school bubble and join the mainstream education system. High school, where they would teach us how to put on condoms. Chapter 2. It begins with a question. Who do you want to be? Every choice we make from childhood, and every choice our parents make for us, goes toward answering that question. From the very first moments of consciousness, I am crafting, shaping, building, and nurturing my best self. My mother believes in the power of shaping your life. She taught me to visualize my best self and to push through anything and everything in order to become the best possible daughter, friend, sister, lover, human. From an early age, I knew exactly what my best self would look like. In no particular order, she would be brave, intelligent, beautiful, desirable, independent, and cool. Pretty much everything every young woman wants to be when she's 11, has frizzy hair, and reads too much. My first real opportunity to shape myself came when I started grade 6 at a new school. New kids are always untapped wells of possibility and potential, and I wasn't the only new student that year to spark speculation among our future classmates about who we would be before we had even arrived. "Everyone thought you were going to be a boy," was the first thing one of my new classmates said to me. No one knew what to think of a new girl with a name like Nellwyn. It didn't help that my brother and I were the only half-Jewish kids in a French Catholic school and we didn't know the Lord's Prayer. My mom had mumbled something about her Catholic upbringing when they'd asked for our baptismal certificates upon enrollment, pretending she hadn't raised us to be critical thinking agnostics. Luckily for us, Francophone schools in Ontario are notoriously desperate for students, and my French was flawless. The French boys I knew were always overtly sexual, and this new school was no exception. They told the dirtiest jokes at the back of the school bus, and they all had this look. It was a look that told us they knew exactly what our parents whispered about. That look was like a dare. While all the French girls are doing it. But what was it exactly? André had that look. He came to us from the alluring province of Quebec, known to us Franco-Ontarians as the motherland. He kind of looked like Eminem. I mostly remember a blonde buzz cut on a scrawny white boy. Despite being my fellow new kid, he seemed to belong more than anyone, regardless of the difference in his accent. He had unnatural confidence for a boy who was only 11. He would have fit in anywhere. I, on the other hand, arrived at my new school feeling like I couldn't possibly have been more out of place. After a girl in a plaid dress pushed me in the schoolyard, I resigned myself to a lonely, friendless existence. But then there was André, the boy who stood next to me for our class picture and asked if I had instant messaging so we could talk outside school. The internet was really starting to take off, and instant messaging seemed to be the communication method of the future. We'd all been cautioned against the dangers of chat rooms and the predators who lurked there, but, as I told my mother, this was different. Although you could change your screen name, everyone logged in with their email address, so you knew who you were talking to, and you could only communicate with your approved contact list. I got permission to download MSN Messenger on our family computer, and I was born into the digital age. Every day after school, I would log on and stare at the list of names, waiting for the little gray man next to André's screen name to turn green. I was a 21st century Gatsby, longing for the little green light that made my heart skip. I didn't particularly like him any more than any of the other boys I knew, but I adored the attention he had started to give me. I spent countless hours carefully crafting my screen names so I could present the best possible version of myself to the world. Exactly the version I wanted everyone to see. The ability to customize a screen name to your heart's content made the possibilities for preteen self-expression seemingly limitless, and it solved the nasty problem of actually having to talk to your crush in person. André and I would spend hours chatting online together, only to avoid each other in school the next day. It took weeks of cyber flirting, or what my 11-year-old self guessed was flirting, before he finally got up the courage to address our fledgling romance in real life. As was usual for me, I was reading a novel hidden under my desk, so I have no idea what the weather was like that day or what allegedly important bit of geometry or history